Art education for children reside in Aboriginal and rural areas. We will send the GoFundMe link in chat and also post on Facebook and Twitter after the meeting. So we'll show you the video right now. Okay, that's really good, isn't it? So really thank you to our young members who does such a great video. And we would also like to thank Pasiwa International for supporting this project through the Young Women's Fund. Okay. So we'll wait probably 1 more minute, then we'll officially start the meeting. I see more participants are coming in. Okay. All right. Okay, let's officially start today's meeting. I'll say good morning, Good afternoon and good evening, everyone from different time zones. Welcome to Pasiwa, Taiwan's CSW 65 Parallel event. Today, we'll discuss about the role of NPOs and NGOs in the formation of public policy. Our 6 speakers from different regions. We have Dr. Hongru Lai, Dr. Fangling Chen from Taiwan. We have Ms. Oma Sorani Ong, will share from Malaysia, and also Dr. Yukiko Takezawa, Dr. Mariko Fujikawa from Japan, and Dr. Michael Christine Weiss on the way of United States from Israel. They will share the best practice and policy initiative and advocacy by women in NGOs and show us how to overcome the challenges through the power of inter-organization cooperations. First, let's welcome Dr. Hongru Lai.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Dr. Hongru Lai is an assistant professor of College of Humanity and Social Sciences at the Providence University, Taiwan. Dr. Lai has a PhD from Social and Policies Sciences Department from University of Bath, United Kingdom. She worked as a social worker in Women's Welfare Service Centers and as a R&D specialist in Taiwan Fund and Children and Families. Her expertise includes women's rights policies, children and family welfare services, and social welfare policies and social work practice. So Dr. Lai.
So thank you for introducing me, and I'm going to share my screen now and start my talk. Can you all see the slides?
Yes, we can see
you.
the slides. Thank you.
Hi, so this is Hongru, and like the introduction, I was a social worker in Women's Welfare Service Center in Taichung City, my city. And after my PhD studying, I'm still interested in issues in relation to women's rights and gender policy in Taiwanese context. So today I would like to share with you some of my observations in relation to today's topic, the role of NPOs and NGOs in the formation of public policy especially in the Taiwanese context. As I'm the first speaker of this session, I would like to start this presentation with an overarching framework instead of how this organization in Taiwan have been doing in detail throughout these years, because I believe Dr. Fenli Chen, she will give us more introduction of this realm. But I prepared here the layout of this presentation. I would like to first start with an argument that the nature of gender is personal and is also public. So this creates the space for an organization in the third sector or the volunteer sector to work on for the well-being of women. And I would like to bring the discussion in relation to the roles of NGOs and address 3 findings where I look at the case of Taiwan and of course simple cases in Southeast Asia. And finally close the presentation with the hope to bring the future expectation. So when we talk about the nature of gender, we define it as a difference between 2 sexes, and it's inevitable to see women in private and also public sectors and areas that they would face oppression. So it is sure that we have to make change to certain situations. And for this century, we have seen that feminist groups have taken social movement as one of the measures to change the society. So, and this has become the most famous mottos and also motto of the feminist movement. The feminists began to bring the issues to the public discussion through collective methods, and it's never going to be far from politics. And from the author of the book, Gender Politics, Azo Klein reckons that there are 3 stages that gender consciousness might grow. And Peggy McIntosh When she came to Taiwan in 1985, she shared the concepts of how the feminist movement might grow in Taiwan, where a similar process of development is presented. In any way, the problem has to be recognized first and redefined, so the action could be taken and changes could be made. Sorry, that's the phase theory from Peggy McIntosh. So in terms of the roles of NPOs and NGOs, administer process, it could be most important for us to put everything into place. So we believe that to run an organization to advocate for women, it requires beliefs and all the physical measures, such as to put everything onto agenda, mobilization and networking, or making coalition with other members who share the similar value with you. So all of this work of NGOs and NPOs set out for several purposes. And one of the important purpose to urge the change being made in the public sector where the state or the government is in charge. And other than this, from the Sydney Taro's point of view, the work of NPOs and NGOs to the state or the government is also strongly affected by political opportunity structure that they are at. So if the structure are open and friendly, it is more likely that the NGOs work can succeed. So also the NPO NGOs are actually choosing multiple issues to work on according to the vision. The issues vary. However, we can look at the issues from two perspectives. One is gender politics and the other is sexual politics, where the gender politics discuss about equality in work, education, participation, and property. Sexual politics discuss the basic issues when women are taken as object to men in the patriarchal society and are nearly impossible to have the autonomy to have an abortion or have sexual behavior freely without avoiding the shame. So nowadays, we cannot ignore that issues happen from all around the world might be interconnected with each other. And for example, we cannot really avoid globalization, and the non-state actors such as NGOs or NPOs, as well as the state actors, have to work together to fulfill their mutual goals. So through the discussion from the scholars who offered us some insights, I would like to review the development of feminist movement in Taiwan with you and share with you some of the essential findings in relation to the operation of the feminist group throughout these 5 decades. So the seed of feminist work began at around 70s in the Taiwanese context. As you can see at the first stage, I left a comment that the feminist work is only working amongst the Middle East or in the north part of Taiwan. In the 80s, there are more and more NGOs and NPOs had their first appearance during the process. The one which are still in the center of the advocate work is the Awakening Foundation. However, the way they promoted feminist ideas are restricted and had to compromise with the patriarchal mentality which the society held at the time. In the 90s, due to the abandonment of the martial art law, the right and the freedom of gathering and the demonstration have been given back to the people. You can see the feminist group members have been expand their arguments towards various issues, and there was huge progress in terms of launching legislations in relation to stop child prostitution and promoting work rights. In this decade, we can also see the feminist NGOs effectively mobilize the resources or allies necessary for the movement, as well as breaking alliances once the groups held different opinions against each other. In the 2000s, the work from the feminist group came to a new level when some of the activists entered the government and worked as consultants. So the seed of feminist work can grow from within the state institute and even adopting the CEDAW and gender mainstreaming as important tool to develop policies. So through this process, I come up with 3 findings here to share. When the first focus is the process from creating space for conversation to public policy formation. Second is the mission of the NGOs and the discourses of the issue. finally will be the collaboration with other parties in the process of movement. So to give a review to the process, I would like to take one issue as an example, an issue which is very much relevant to each one of us about the working rights. What present here are the general obstacles women would have encountered when they are trying to be a housewife or to work. As we can see, there are concerns rising when housewives were not paid for their domestic contributions, or career women who cannot stay at their job after deciding to intermarry or give birth to children. So this is the issues that we have to acknowledge. And this figure tells us about women's labor market participation rate in different countries. You can see the dark blue line is the Taiwanese case. So women in Taiwan are very likely to withdraw from the labor market after they are 50 years old. And so the odds are higher than any other countries I have presented in the figure. So under this kind of circumstances, you can see that in the 80s, there were individual women came up and fight for their rights. To draw public attention, we see that they began to work with NGOs and create space to talk to the media and to the public. And this story has provided ingredients for formation of legislation regarding gender equality in the employment. So this orange little box here is not just a little box. The legislative process is actually being delayed by the employers for at least 1 decade. And in 2002, the gender equality employment law has finally been launched. So however, due to a strong rejection from the corporations, we can see that bill only helps to achieve formal equality by that time and not substantive equality. So nowadays, the gender equality in employment law in Taiwan has been amended several times, and to some level, the female workers' right is under protection, showing how difficult it is to create space for conversation and form the public policy. So in terms of the second finding, you can see that feminist NGOs could choose issues and positions to attend the event, which later become the reason of how they form their alliances and break alliances. For example, when checking the issues in relation to child prostitution and abortion, we find that there were 2 discourses of positions that NGOs worked on. For the child prostitution, both the conservative and progressive activists stood at the same line, while in the discourses on abortion, they broke their alliances. The second example shows the same situation. When the discussion on the working rights and marriage rights are once in the same path and separate, especially when the consciousness of gay marriage emerged since 2010. So it is inevitable to see the conservative groups have been not only stopped the alliances, but also become strong opponents during the process. The last one is referring to the example of how the activists and the states work together. As I said, there are so many feminist activists, let's say elite, who join the Gender Equality Committee of the Executive Yuan and also Foundation of Women's Rights Promotion and Development. They are also members of NGOs in the committee to offer the real situation and real needs from the public, and the public officials are the ones who execute the policy suggested. So this form of collaboration has successfully brought the dual to gender mainstream to the agenda. However, there used to be concerns from the other scholars that this committee is not inclusive enough, and how the public officials have to take all the responsibilities is not when the other members, they don't have to. So it would be very interesting to see how this form of collaboration could bring to the formation of policy in the future. So from the case of Taiwan, I have learned that it requires strong beliefs that women's situation has to be changed, and we have to create necessary discourses with quantitative and qualitative evidence during the process. And we have to make allies and break allies. It's not only to our NGOs members, also to the administrators. And the last is we can take measures range from grassroots activisms, legislative change, to decode interpretation to institutionalization in administration. Oh, sorry. And here, I have found cases from Malaysia and Philippines. They sort of resemble the similar situation in Taiwan. Well, in Malaysia, you can see that there are groups who are political and apolitical. In Philippines, perhaps there are tensions between class within in the feminist group. And we have criticisms on how feminists are collaborating with the government. So in the new century, we might have to ask whether gender has become equal, or actually we can move ourselves to a new phase. So there are old existing issues such as working rights for women, but the digital world, we might need to deal with violence in virtual. And to solve the problem, to majority of women in Taiwan, we still have ethnical issues that requires our attention, such as indigenous women or new immigrants. So of course, after the voice of women could be heard, how about men? What can bring them to part of this? These are all important things we can work on for the coming phase. And to conclude, as a member of civil society, we might need to ask ourselves which phase we're at, what beliefs or discourse we support, and what issue we're aiming to discuss. And most important, who can we work with to make things happen so women's rights could be promoted and gender equality could be achieved. So I will close my presentation here. And here are the references I cited for this presentation. And I thank you for your listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lai. So for those who may have questions for Dr. Lai, I'll ask you to save the question till end of the section. And please type your question in chat, and we'll try, if we have time at the end of the section, we'll ask all speakers or our panelists of the questions that you have. Okay, so next we'll have Ms. Obna Serini Ong. Ms. Obna Serini Ong is the founder and managing director of the award-winning social enterprise and gender consultancy, which is committed toward advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women. She has 25 years of experience in the design, development, and coordination of programs in the area of policy development, gender advocacy, strategic planning, and community building. Having worked with corporations, universities, and schools, NGO, government, and grassroots organizations, she also has served on government delegations as speaker at international and regional meetings and conferences. Oma is the recent past honorary Secretary General of the National Council of Women Organization, Malaysia. She also currently serves on Malaysia Joint CEDAW Advocacy Coalition Working Committee and the Joint CSO Working Group on Law Reform and Parliament Engagement, and is also the co-chairperson of the Malaysia CSO Coalition Against Modern Slavery, the Joint Hands Against Modern Slavery. She's actively involved in the advocacy and implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and in the gender consultant of All-Party Parliamentary Group, SDG, which undertakes the localization of SDG in parliamentary constitutions, and she also served on the National SDG Steering Committee. She will talk to us about the journey of CSO in Malaysia's women's movement in advocating for legislative policy reform and institutionalized government CSO partnership and challenging and learnings. So we'll have Ms. Obna Serini Ong.
Thank you, Dr. Mandy. Thanks for sharing the slides. I'll wait for that to get started. If we can go to the first one. Yeah, and the presentation mode, if you could please. Thank you so much. So very good morning, everyone. Hello, and as we say in Malaysia, salam to everyone and warmest greetings from Malaysia. I'm delighted to join all of you at the CSW this year. I must tell you that my team and I were all prepared and booked, as I'm sure many of you were, to attend last year's CSW. when the pandemic hit us globally. But I'm sure that this year's session may be really a turning point in making the NGO Forum more inclusive by allowing many who may have otherwise not been able to really afford that trip to New York. So I'm delighted that I'm sure many people, women and men, are attending the forum this year. So I've been asked to share about the experience of the Malaysian NPOs and NGOs. And I would, we have a very robust civil society organizations in movement in Malaysia. But I would really like to share with you our experience in shaping public policy in the context of advancing gender equality in Malaysia. And I will be sharing the collective experience of the organizations and spaces that I'm currently involved in. Next, please. Next, if you can click next. Thank you. Who's managing? Thank you. So I'd like to approach my presentation by telling you about our story thus far in the ongoing journey of the women's movement from 1960 to date or even before. And as you can see from that long winding road there, our work, as you will all agree, is not a direct or easy path. And just now when Hongju presented, we can see so many parallels of the ups and downs of this journey. And I feel it's important for us to reflect on this journey. It's really necessary for us to reflect, to keep us aligned to and on track in realizing the vision of achieving substantive equality, not merely in word or policy, but really in terms of outcomes. Next. I think the transition's a little lagging, is it? Thank you. So the call for women's rights, of course, began way before 1960s, even in the early 1930s and 1940s. It was in the form of women rights champions who stood up against resistance, persecution, for their progressive stand on calling for inclusion and the recognition of the rights of women. And the 1960s saw the emergence of the women's movement in Malaysia. And I must at this point out and duly honor Persewa, who was very much a part of the women's movement from the early days and also played a very major role in forming of the coalition. Next, please. Next, thank you. So the ripple effect began in 1959. How exciting when 3 women were elected as members of parliament. Now the representation of women leadership at the highest levels in itself could have been the impetus for the next stage of development in 1960. What happened is that 8 women came together from various organizations, including Persewa, and decided that there was a need to amplify voices to address the multiple discriminations facing women. Now, the next landmark decision was in the recognition of women's role in the country, and that was in the designation of National Women's Day on the 25th of August by the then first Prime Minister of Malaysia, and where a celebration was held at the National Stadium. Now, that's a big deal, when it's held at the National Stadium. Now, the 8 women went on to form the Pro Tem Committee, and they went on to invite 8 organizations that formed the National Council of Women's Organizations, Malaysia. Now, the NCWO was set up, aimed to integrate women as equal partners in mainstream of development. Now, soon after, in 1969, how exciting, the president of NCWO was one of the, who were one of the 3 members of parliament who were elected in 1959, was appointed as the first woman minister in the Malaysian cabinet. That was in 1969. Next, please. Now, united in mission, the organizations under NCWO began the process of instituting legislative change in a number of critical areas. Next. As you can see from all the media media attention. Now, the legislative changes which they advocated for and succeeded were in the areas of marriage and divorce, taxation, land and inheritance rights, violence against women, custody and guardianship, which in many cases gave women the simple recognition as equal citizens in the country. Now, their advocacy took the form of memorandums, seminars to raise awareness, build the groundswell, engage legislators and policymakers. Now, today I can say that, you know, our mothers, sisters, and wives, I'm sure there are men in the room, have better lives as a result of the tireless efforts of these 8 women. And I want to say 8 women because really to accentuate the point that it really takes the power of the small numbers as well, who sat around the table and decided to bring about change. So today, NCW is a national coalition of more than 100 women's organizations across the country. Next, please. So Malaysian women's organizations were also active participants at the international levels. We had representatives on the CSW as early as 1969, followed by another representative of the CEDAW committee in 2005. And they were both participants and ongoing and on government delegations to the UN Women's Conferences, where they served as often as advisors to government representatives. Now, at the regional levels, women's organizations were also instrumental in the formation of the ASEAN Confederation of Women's Organizations and also the ASEAN Committee on Women, which was actually done through a memorandum to the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta in the 70s. Next, please. Now, on their return from the Nairobi conference in 1985, they began another wave of legislative reforms after a 3-day national workshop to identify discriminatory legislations. Now, a memorandum was submitted to the government containing substantive recommendations calling for urgent legal reform on 7 major legislations, and including rape and molestation, domestic violence, custody, guardianship maintenance, inheritance and property rights, labor law, income tax laws, and social security. And mind you, it was a long drawn process which took many years. The domestic violence legislation, for example, took 10 years before enactment, but it required keeping the issues on the agenda through deliberate and focused advocacy strategies. Next, please. Now, the CSOs, the National Women's Coalitions, were instrumental in the formation of early national machineries. The National Advisory Council on Women in Development, or NACIWID, was formed soon after the UN Women's Conference in Mexico, and the president of NCW at that time was appointed as its first chairperson. This was followed by the formation of the Department of Women's Affairs, and later in 2001, we saw the formation of the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. And this specifically, the ministry, the recommendation for the ministry was formulated or put in or mooted by NCW in a memorandum to the government in 1990, I believe. Next, please. Now, the Women's Coalition were also instrumental in providing key recommendations to the national policy on women through a bottom-up approach, where it met with women at the grassroots to hear their voices and their issues and recommendations. And this was, all their recommendations were appended to a cabinet paper which is presented to government. Now, the coalition also raised gender concerns from as early as 1981, when it participated in the government's national budget consultations through the submission of budget memorandums till today. There were several other significant landmark decisions and enactments, which included Malaysia's ratification of CEDAW and the 2001 amendment to the federal constitution, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender. Next, please. So women's organizations have also over the years and now also been appointed to participate actively in several high-level consultative spaces. Now, I will also say that it has not been an easy journey. It required a lot of advocacy and meetings with the government to actually make this happen. We see that we are now on the National SDG Steering Committee. We're on the Domestic Violence Task Force of the Ministry. There's also the special task force that was set up to develop the sexual harassment and gender equality legislations, where you see key civil society and women's movement experts on board. We are also have seats on the National Council of Anti-Trafficking Persons, and also on many government delegations to international and regional meetings. So we have those spaces that we are and seat on the table. But again, I must emphasize that it was not very easy. We had to really work for that. Next, please. Now, another area I think which is important in which we see ourselves being involved is we know that the national budget is a policy statement now, reflecting the government's social and economic priorities and the fulfillment of its political commitment in monetary terms to specific programs and policies. Now, developing the national budget from a gender perspective, we know will ensure equitable impact of government policies on women and men, boys and girls, and the real contributions of all individuals make to the economy. Now, in this way, the government, we know, can involve and implement policies that ensure the equitable distribution and benefits of economic growth to all. Now, women's NGOs have been participating in the national budget consultation, as I mentioned earlier, since 1981. Now, the government has also instituted gender responsive budgeting in 2005, but I must say that its efficacy is yet to be established, and there's a lot of work to be done in this area. Now, through the efforts of state women's NGOs, the Penang state government, in a progressive step, instituted gender responsive participatory budgeting, which gathers critical input from grassroots to advise the allocation of state budgets to serve the people's needs. I'm proud to say that in 2020, Engender, in collaboration with another of our partner women's organization, WAO, which is a women's aid organization, undertook an initiative to scrutinize the national budget through a gender lens. And this has now begun the process of a parallel CSO-led budget cycle, which will be undertaken in 2021. Next, please. Well, 2015 came and began this exciting journey for us. So today we are immersed in the implementation of the SDGs, which is not only does it not only have a standalone goal for gender equality and the empowerment of women, but from its rollout, we have been told that gender equality is the catalyst, the accelerator for the achievement of all the goals. Now, civil society organizations, including women's organizations, are active participants in the process. Today, women CSOs have a seat on the National SDG Steering Committee. We are on the Secretariat of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the SDGs, which is the APPGM. We are also the gender consultant on the APPGM, participate in gender responsive localizing of SDGs in parliamentary constituencies. I served as the lead coordinator in in one particular state in Malaysia. And also we participate very actively in the input towards the SDG roadmap and also the National Voluntary Review, SDG review. Next, please. So we are all very clear that the women's Malaysian women CSOs have from the early days joined forces to monitor and implement CEDAW, which we know is the Bill of Rights for Women. And we have to date produced 3 shadow reports, held government and parliamentary briefings, media campaigns, forums, and awareness workshops for grassroots women's organizations to push for the implementation and domestication of CEDAW into legislation and policies. And this, my dear friends, as we all know, is an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing journey. Next, please. Now, another exciting area that we're working on is in supporting parliamentary oversight. And this we do through the Joint CSO Parliamentary Engagement Working Committee that we have formed, where we accompany our parliamentarians, where we provide questions for them to ask ministries during parliamentary debate. We also monitor the parliamentary debate on gender issues. We conduct briefing sessions at Parliament, and we also support the special select committees, and there's one on women that has been recently set up as well. Next. Now, women's joint ongoing collaborative efforts are really currently in law reform in terms of amending discriminatory or enacting discriminatory laws, in enacting sexual harassment and gender equality legislations, which is already in place. It is a progressive step by government, and it came with a lot of CSO advocacy as well. Parliamentary engagement, CEDAW advocacy and monitoring state accountability on its commitments to gender equality. In terms of pushing for greater attention to gender responsive budgeting, we're very much involved in the SDG implementation, as I mentioned, and as well as sexual harassment in public spaces, something that Engender works on through our Safe City campaign, where we create solutions with local governments. Next. So, as I mentioned at the start, that our journey has been long drawn and with many challenges, but I think it's important for us to reflect on this, and we really see these as opportunities and entry points to further advance the process. One would be definitely in terms of political will, but not will alone, volition and action by the government. We continue to see systemic and sociocultural barriers. Definitely the lack of data to facilitate evidence-based policymaking. There's also need greater attention to be made to gender-responsive budgetary allocations. We need to strengthen the national framework for action for gender equality and work with CSOs to make that happen. Results-based monitoring and evaluation, which is a global phenomenon, we know, that really is a stumbling block towards us understanding what the impact is or the lack of it. Conceptual understanding of gender equality concepts is something that we need to really work on. Not so much for CSOs, I think we need that, but also a lot in terms of the government. And also technical capacity of government to undertake gender mainstreaming. So these are continuing challenges that we have, but I think I would like to say opportunities as well to move things forward. And next, please. So some of the key learnings we have seen is really the power of collaborative action, our strengthening of our strategic advocacy. We have over the years been able to work towards institutionalizing the seat of the table. And yes, it's been back and forth, but we're learning how to do it. We ourselves are participating in developing evidence-based policymaking. Keeping gender on the agenda is key. We realized that we couldn't have done it without the groundswell, without the public participation. So there's been a lot of media advocacy, public awareness and empowerment, and also empowering the grassroots women. You know, today with the SDGs, we know that everyone has that capacity to contribute towards the betterment of society. And so we know that we have to empower the grassroots women and give them that voice of agency. And definitely support government's capacity building on gender equality as well. Next. So 2020 and the pandemic, and we realized that, you know, what has come to the fore is pre-existing inequalities that we've always known, but it's been brought to the fore, and we require, I think, to rethink, reconceptualize both government and civil society on what we need to do in order to rewrite this new normal, which is becoming, I hope it doesn't become cliche, but what does it look like? What does this new normal need to look like? And we know that gender equality is going to be the key in terms of making that happen. But I'm always reminded in telling the story, and I need the next slide for that. So my final slide. Now this is what drives us. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, I would like to say people, yeah, we can't say citizens anymore, it's the people and population that can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. But you know what's missing from here is the growing number of young men and men who are coming to the fore and who also see themselves as protagonists in pushing for gender equality. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Omna, for this wonderful talk. Next, we'll have Dr. Fenling Chen. Dr. Chen Fenling is a professor of Department of Social Work at National Taiwan University. She earned her PhD from Social and Policy Sciences, Department, University of Bath. She's also the president of Council on Social Welfare Taiwan. May we have Dr. Chen?
Hi. It's nice to introduce the situation in Taiwan with all of you. Page 2. Taiwan, sorry, we're waiting for the PPT. Okay. Okay, page 2. Although Taiwan is a small island, but we have a lot of NGOs in Taiwan, over 3,000 of NGO in Taiwan. And the NGO also involved in a lot of things, including welfare service delivery, policy advocacy, and join a lot of governmental committees. Next, page 3. And the women movement. Sorry, page 3. And before year 1987, the NGO are forbid to set up before that. And after year 1970s, a lot of women NGOs set up after that. And also they raised a lot of issue, social issue, and try to protect women, including human trafficking, and also a lot of demonstration during this period. And because in the beginning, the NGO, the women's NGO, usually led by elites, including lawyer. So in the early stage, we focus on the law regulation. Okay, next, page 4. And the most achievement, page 4. Next. And the achievement, the major achievement during the year 1980s and year 2020 is the amendment of Civil Code. And the Civil Code regulates the gender equality in the families. And in Taiwan, traditionally, it's a patriarchal family systems. Women have to stay in husband's home and also have to change the name after marriage. But after that, after the amendments, it's become more flexible. And the most important is the change of the custody after divorce. In the original Civil Code, the custody of children belong to the father, definitely. So it's forbid women to divorce, even the marriage is unhappy, or even the partner, or even the partner is violated. So after the change of custody, and women are become more freedom during the marriage. Also the change, including the poverty and including the children's name as well. Next page, page 5. Another achievement is the change of the gender equality law. Page 5, the next one. Another achievement is the promotion of gender equality law. This is the one of the first law not guided by the government, not promoted by the government, but promoted by people. So the gender equality law regulates the equality in the labor market. So in this law, including the employment, examination, promotion, and the performance evaluation in the labor market. And also the most serious problem in Taiwan is the pregnancy discrimination. The employers like to fire women during their pregnancy because they don't want to take the cost during during their birth because the woman maybe have to take rest with salary for 2 months. And the next page, page 6. The next one. Yeah. This law also including how to prevent sexual harassment in the labor market, and also in order to balance the work and the families for working parents, also promote menstrual leave, parental leave, marital leave, parental leave, and the family leave. A different kind of leave try to release the burden the employees have to take care of their children and the families. Next one, page 7. Next one, please. And another important policies promoted by NGO is the violence against the woman. And Taiwan became the first country in Asia passed domestic violence prevention law. And this law have to set up a domestic violence prevention center in all labor of government. And the next one, next page, please. Page 8. And in this law, we have to in this center, different kind of department or different discipline have to work together to help women. And also we introduce the protection orders. If the beater violate the protection orders, and the police have right to catch this beater. So also the government have to provide shelter or other kind of welfare to help the victims can escape from the violent family. The next one, next page, please. And we also, next page, please. And you can see from this period, almost all new act passed during this act is about gender, including year 1997 is a Sexual Assault Criminal Prevention Act, or the year 1998 is Domestic Violence Prevention Act, and also special act about women and family who suffer from violence, and if they escaped from family, maybe they don't have money for living. So we have a special act for that. And the year 2002 is the Gender Equality Act. Year 2004, Gender Equality Act in education. And the year 2005 is we passed the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act. So you can find that a lot of different new law passed during this age. Okay, next one. Next page, page 10. And recently, we become the first country in Asia who legalized the same-sexual marriage, because in year 2007, the Chief Judgment say that we forbidden the same-sex marriage is violate the construction in Taiwan. So the government have to make a new law for that during 2 years. Okay, next one. Next page, page 11. So we pass a new law. Next page, please. So we passed a new law just 2 years ago, and become the first one, the same-sex marriage, we are allowed to accept them, and including the poverty inheritance, and including adopt the children for the previous marriage. Okay, next one. Next page, page 12. Next one, please. And you know that Taiwan is not the member of UN, so it's difficult to catch up the international progress about gender equality. And in UN from the year 1995, they began a new policy. It's about gender mainstreaming. So Taiwan also want to catch up the gender mainstreaming work in Taiwan. And also we signed a CEDAW convention for that. All the effort is try to catch up the change of the international society. Okay, next one. Next page. So during from the year 2005, we begin to promote gender mainstreaming in Taiwan, try to promote gender statistics, and also gender assessment in the central government, and also gender budget, all kind of work. Those gender mainstreaming policies work in all kind of the world, and also the Taiwan also want to do the same thing. Okay, next page. So in year 2012, it's a very important. You can push the button until the last picture. And in year 2012, yeah, we have a formal department in the central government, and this central government, this department in central government can push all kind of gender equality policies in Taiwan. And next, the last one, please. And is Taiwan, next one. Is Taiwan successful? For Taiwan, Taiwan is a successful case? And this is a picture. Taiwan have over 100 universities in Taiwan. And this is the picture for the presidents of all universities in Taiwan. And how many women you can find from this picture. And you can see we still have a long way to go. So I would like to close my presentation here, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. So we'll see, we'll have some questions that's posted in the chat, but we'll try to get everybody finish their talk within our time frame, and hopefully we'll have some time left in the end to answer the questions. So next, we'll have two speakers from Japan, Dr. Yukiko Takezawa and Dr. Mariko Fujikawa. Dr. Yuriko Takezawa is currently a lecturer at Osaka Jokakun University. She has a PhD degree in international public policy. She has been the youth representative of Pasiwa International since 2013. Yukiko is currently working on communication and networking for youth members of Pasiwa International and Pasiwa Japan through activities raising awareness on gender issues. Her expertise includes international security, especially in European and Nordic security policy. And with her, also Dr. Mariko Fujikawa, MD, PhD. She earned her Doctor of Medicine degree from Tokyo Women's Medical University and a PhD in medicine from Toyama University. She worked in public health field for over 20 years for the Toyama Prefecture government and at health centers in Tokyo and Chiba. She was a director of Ichihara Public Health Center in Chiba for 4 years. She has served as an expert on committees for Tokyo Medical Doctors Association since 2006, Ministry of Health and Welfare since 2014, and Chiba Prefecture, Ichihara City since 2017. She has been a member of Pasiwa Japan since 2016 and is currently a professor of basic medicine and public health at Taikyo Hensei University and adjunct professor of the Taikyo Chiba Medical Center. And her life work vocation is community-based health promotion of diabetes prevention and treatment. So we'll have Dr. Yukiko and Dr. Mariko.
Okay. Hello. Yes. Could you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for giving me such a wonderful opportunity. My name is Yukiko Takezawa, a youth representative of Pasiwa International. I'm also a researcher of international public policy. Today's topic is not my specific area of my research, but as I have today's opportunity, in my part, I will shortly explain how Japan has achieved gender equality in governmental institutional levels, which are related to the cooperation with NGO and NPOs. After that, Dr. Fujikawa will introduce a specific case of the implementation of a public policy regarding women's health care. Is my slide, can you see my slide? Could you show my slide, please? Or should I show by myself? Or okay, yes. Okay, then the second one, please. Okay, first of all, when we talk about Japan and gender equality, according to the Global Gender Gap Report by World Economic Forum, Japan is ranked 121st on Gender Gap Index, which is obviously a shame. As for the causes, there are lower percentages of female politicians and women in managerial positions. Also, we have gender issues regarding employment, income gap, domestic violence, etc. And these situations are worsening because of COVID-19 crisis. So here are questions. How has the Japanese government worked on legislation and institutionalization on gender equality? Also, how do the legislation and institutions regarding gender equality cooperate with NGO and NPOs to implement public policies? Next, please. Now let's briefly see how the legislation of gender equality in Japan has been developed. In Japan, women actually got right to vote after World War II ended, and the laws regarding gender equality were primarily enacted during 1970s to 80s. But the progress was not enough, especially in the field of politics and economy business. More recently, there are several laws passed and enacted, and the most important ones are the Basic Act on a Gender Equal Society and Act on Promotion of Women's Participation and Advancement in the Workplace. Although the pace is still slow, there are some significant improvements with the Basic Act on a Gender Equal Society, which was enacted in 1999 in realization of the need to adopt the Beijing Declaration. Next, please. And the Basic Act on a Gender Equal Society was enacted in regard that gender equal society is positioned as the most important issue in determining the framework of 21st century Japan, and those policies on the promotion of the formation of gender equal society are implemented in all fields. As mentioned in Article 5 of the Act, it included NGO and NPOs to implement policies together with other private organizations. Significantly, the Basic Act distributes action plans to implement public policies every 5 years, and the plan regards NGO and NPOs as important stakeholders to activate the plan. So next, please. The latest action plan, which is the 5th, was decided in December 2020 by the Cabinet, set the 11 fields to implement public policies based on gender equality. Here I listed 9 of them, and now it covers significant fields of gender issues such as women's participation in the fields of policy decision making process, equal employment and work-life balance, science and technology, violence against women, women's lifelong health, disaster prevention, environmental issues, education, and international cooperation. The plan is assessed to be much more detailed than the previous plan, and it was revised to match the real needs of each field. One of the distinguished cases which the voice of the NPO was implemented to this action plan will be introduced by Dr. Fujikawa after my presentation. So next, please. Talking about organizational cooperation with NGOs and NPOs, already since 1994, there was a headquarters for the promotion of gender equality in Prime Minister's office, which was formed with the NGO subcommittee. But now, the core organization is Gender Equality Bureau of the Cabinet Office, which was established in 2001 based on the 1999 Act. It consists of Council for Gender Equality, led by Prime Minister and all cabinet ministers, and with the committee consisted of experts such as scholars, doctors, and companies executives on gender issues. Ministries are also cooperating with NPO and NGOs according with the related issues individually. And more notably here, the Bureau holds regular meetings called Gender Equality Promotion Meeting, inviting the members, NGOs, and NPOs according to the related public policies and social issues. Next, please. I finally shortly give one example. Example of a regular meeting held by Gender Equality Bureau, inviting the members, NGOs, and NPOs. I have attended the meeting as an attendant of the Pasiwa Japan president, who is one of the committee members. The meeting is titled Working with Next Generation Team, and one of the tasks of the team is to make sub-textbook for junior high school students about gender issues. Gender Equality Bureau is responsible for editing the textbook, and they ask the appointed NGO and NPO members about the contents. Then several young women leaders of NPO and NGOs presented and offered the concrete suggestion from the real voices of young girls by conducting questionnaires. It was about what's really happening among young girls in Japan. like dating DV and online sexual harassment. And then the coordinators and the officers of the Bureau were taken by surprise with unexpected real voices from young women. Now the textbook is being rearranged. Like this, we can see many remarkable examples with NGO and NPOs providing the impetus. Next, Dr. Fujikawa will introduce more specific case of an NPO that has implemented the policy regarding healthcare. Thank you very much.
Could you show my slide, please? Well, I'd like to thank you for Chair Dr. Mandy Chen and the organizers for Pacific Taiwan for giving me this opportunity to present. I have to speak in a higher speed because the time up is approaching. So please forgive me speak in a higher speed. Well, Dr. Takezawa talked about the legislation and basic acts regarding gender equality in Japan. As she explained, the Gender Equality Bureau of the Japanese government holds NPO and NGOs and their opinions in high esteem. These days, in practical cases of implementation on gender equality, experts and specialists from NPOs and NGOs are chosen as members of committees, and they advocate recommendations or requests in their meetings. This path is actually encouraging us. I'm going to show you one of the best cases. But first, I'd like to tell you 2 facts of women's health matters I encountered in public health centers I was working for 20 years. Next, please. One of the cases I came across was psychosomatic disorder of an infertile woman. She was over 40 years old and her public subsidies for infertility treatments were about to expire. This slide shows a declining birth rate and a tendency towards late pregnancies. 60 years ago, 60% of mothers at the first birth were in their 20s, but these days, 60% are in their 30s, and the number in their 40s is increasing. Next, please. This slide shows infertility treatment public subsidy rate and age. 30% of lesbians are over 40 years old. Unfortunately, the fertility rate over 40 years old is very low. As a public health doctor, I felt the lack of comprehensive health education on gender-related matters and needed to improve health literacy for both men and women. Next, please. Another case was a baby's murder by his mother, a high school student. She gave birth by herself and threw the baby in a bush near her school. This slide shows the statistics on abortion in Japan. These days, abortions are decreasing. In 2016, the number of abortions for women under 15 years of age totaled 220 in all of Japan. I tried to make an appeal for the necessity of sex education, including contraception to principals at every education board meeting at public health center. However, most of the principals were men. They only pretended to understand my appeal. I terribly felt the gender wall. Next, please. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Kyoko Tanebe to you. I'm sure she's one of the best cases of practicing for policy initiative and advocacy by a woman in an NPO in Japan. She's 56 years old and has been working for 30 years as an obstetrics and gynecology doctor. She lives and works in Toyama Prefecture. Toyama is one of the conservative and socially and culturally male-dominant areas. As you can see, while she saw many female patients, she ran into the realities of hidden causes. Many patients revealed they never dared to confess troubles or truths such as rape, sexual violence, and domestic violence by husbands or partners in front of male doctors. She took action to work on the local administration and started to seek measures to eliminate sexual violence against women with a few NPO groups. She also became a charter member of NPO, Japan Joint Association of Medical Professional Women, which consists of female medical doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and so on. Please see the photo in the bottom left. The photo in the bottom middle shows a sex education lecture in a junior high school by her. She mentioned the morning after pill in the lecture. Most of the teachers were astounded and upset to hear her lecture. Shamefully, even many college students do not know about the contraception or correct use of the pill. She kept on taking action to eliminate sexual violence against women as an expert and a member of an NPO working on sexual violence and countermeasure. The photo in the bottom right shows her dedication set up the one-stop center for victims of sexual violence against women in Toyama. Next, please. She finally made up her mind to become a politician. She was elected a member of the Toyama Prefectural Assembly in 2019. She was inspired and supported by not only the sexual victims she cared for, but also many OBGYN doctors, including male doctors, nurses, and non-medical professional civilians. Next, please. Next slide, please. This slide shows concepts of preconception care. As you can see, the source of this slide is WHO. Dr. Tanabe, conscious of the lack of literacy on women's lifelong health through every life stage. Fortunately, almost all the areas I have been concerned with are covered. Next, please. This slide was shown by Dr. Takezawa in her slides. Thanks to being a prefectural assembly member, Dr. Kyoko Tanabe is recognized by the Japanese government as a valuable expert. She was often chosen as a member of the expert research committee of the Japanese government. I'm so glad she became more and more regarded as a right person by the government. She also performed well in working sessions on sexual violence or poverty and so on of women. She pushed forward the ability of negotiation and the power of leadership. Next, please. She is continuing to confront crucial issues of preconception care. In order for a woman to live a life actively, a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being is essential. She also asserts that gender problem-related health issues have social backgrounds, such as DV, abuse, poverty, and difficulty in living, which cannot be solved by medical care alone. Last slide, please. It is great achievement that Dr. Tanabe implemented preconception care in Chapter 7 of the 5th Action Plan. This is a great step for improving gender-conscious issues, including women's health. She has been inspired by the tasks of government through some committees she took part in as acting chairs and a chair. She insists on the need for politics must improve women's health and eradicate violence against women. I'm sure while working in the National Council, she must have come to think of the strengths of a member of the National Diet who can make policy. 1 month ago, she made up her mind to run for the House of Representatives election in Japan this autumn. If she elected, she must be following up the action plans on preconception care, and so will work properly. Regrettably, as usual, as Dr. Takezawa explained, in Japan is situated in the Global Gender Gap Report 2020, Japan ranked as one of the lowest in the world when it comes to female political empowerment. Under the current unfortunate situation, we are very enthusiastic in supporting and cheering Dr. Kyoko Tanebe and telling the world that we need more gender equality conscious politicians like her, especially in Japan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Takezawa and Dr. Fujikawa. Now, our final speaker. We are very honored to have Dr. Mikhail Gunstein-Weiss, who is the Shanti K. Kinduka Distinguished Professor and Associate Dean for Policy Initiative at the Brown School of Social Work of Washington University in St. Louis. She is also the director of university-wide social policy institutes and also the non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a leading expert in the asset building field. She's influential in design and innovative policy to promote house both in the United States and also internationally. Today, she will present synergy addressing inequality through academic, industry, government. Dr. Mikhail Gunstein. Oh, sorry, you have to unmute, please.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. And you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, so the theme of the conference this year is building partnerships with the goal of empowering women across the world. I took a little bit different process, and I will talk about my work today a little bit and thinking about how building partnership and values can really make an impact. So when I look back and think about my work and what helped me achieve these goals, I believe it is the values I received from my parents and the partnerships I build along the way. Caring for vulnerable population and empowering women was one of the deep values I received from my mom. My mom is a social worker who has dedicated her work to helping others. During her early years as a social worker and in retirement years as she established group homes for people with mental illness. And this is my dad. My dad was a Holocaust survivor. He lost his entire family at the age of 10 in the ghettos of Poland and survived for the next 3 years by hiding in the woods. He arrived in Israel as a teenager and had to go to the army and began working right away. One of the biggest disappointments of my father is that he was never having the opportunity to pursue a formal education. Growing up, my father talked to me about the importance of education every single day. From my father, I received the passion for education and the drive for never stop learning. I grew up in Israel, and after completing my master's degree in social work, my love for education and my passion for empowering women helped me create an opportunity to pursue my PhD at Washington University. This is where I became passionate about assets building as a promising social welfare policy. The idea is that while income and consumption is essential, it's not enough for social development. Financial security is achieved through saving and investment in assets such as homeownership, education, and microenterprise. And the theory suggests that when people are holding money in their own name, like children, they grew up and having a better outcomes in life, especially educational outcomes. So this is when this theory got built and suggested, a theory that called child development account, that is the idea of creating a saving account, ideally at birth, providing it for everyone, for all children in the country, making it progressive with greater subsidies for the poorest children, and keeping it restricted for assets building purposes. There are many examples of that in some cities across the US. For example, this is an example of this policy in San Francisco. The city is opening a saving account for kids who are entering kindergarten. They're providing them $50 as a saving account with automatic enrollment, opening the account for them, and provide additional financial education. You can see these cute kids wearing their t-shirts that said kindergarten to college. This is some other example of this idea being implemented in Indiana and Nevada, where called the Kickstart program, where they provide kindergarten lessons on college and career, and giving kids t-shirts saying, "I'm a promised kid." And they even have a field trip where they take little kindergarten to a trip in college, calling it a walk into my future. So I decided to take this idea of creating saving for kids to Israel, where I was born. Why Israel? Israel has one of the highest level of income and wealth inequality compared to any other OECD countries. And nearly 30% of the children in Israel are living in poverty. Israel also has what we call infrastructure, an ability to build a saving account on a mechanism of a child allowance. A child allowance is one of the first anti-poverty policies. It's established in the early 1960s, and it's operating as a monthly allowance, providing up to the age of 18 for kids. It's paid regardless of income, and it's universal to all different sectors in the population. I created several important partnerships to try to introduce this idea of assets building to Israel. I work with the National Insurance Institute, which is like the Social Security Administration of the US. I work with the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Finance, Bank of Israel, and some other leading universities. In 2007, it was the first time I was invited to give a talk in Israel about this idea. And then in 2010, I received my first grant to help bring a delegation from the US to Israel to speak in front of Minister Herzog, who led these ideas, who can pass a law about a children's saving account. And shortly after that meeting, the first bill was introduced to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament. The first time the bill doesn't pass, but Prime Minister Herzog was running for Prime Minister, and in 2014, when he was a finalist to the role of Prime Minister, he announced that that will be the first law he will pass if he wins. And he didn't win the Prime Minister, but the bill did pass in 2015 with the rollover of 2017. Of course, that was a lot of excitement about the idea of having a child saving account for every child in Israel. That was the first country in the world to implement a universal saving account for every kid with monthly deposit from the government. And the way it worked, it was open automatically for all children under the age of 18 with monthly deposit of 50 shekels, equivalent of $13, up to the age of 18. And parents can choose, have two things they can choose, whether they can add additional 50 shekels and where they want to invest the money. What we have learned from then looking on the implementation of the law was that about 70% of the parents were actively enrolling in the program, and about 68% of them were choosing to add additional 50 shekels from the child allowance. But there are still differences in the take-up, which can end up being quite significant in how much money can accumulate in the account. Almost the difference between having 1 year to cover 1 year for college, or being to cover a full bachelor and master degree. So there's still work to be done, and we created some new partnership with the Bank of Israel and other universities to try to implement some interventions to increase what we call the take-up of this program. But still, there's a lot to celebrate, because Israel is having a children's saving account with every child. Will have a saving account and have a nest egg to start their life when they reach the age of 18 or 21. I believe, as Newton said, we build too many walls and not enough bridges. Breaking walls and building bridges were one of the things I was trying to do in my career. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greenstein-Weiss. Thank you for getting up so early to giving us this talk today. I know it's like 4 o'clock in the morning over there. So thank you very much. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers. And we all sure learned so much from you. So we have a little bit of time, I think maybe about 5 minutes or so. Let's see if we can answer some of the questions. Okay, for the first question, I think many of us are wondering, after listening to so many best practice and successful advocacy in terms of policy changing, what are the key elements to forge the collaboration with the government, with other NGO or other entities? Like what kind of environment and where do we start this cooperation? How do we initiate our efforts? So I was wondering if, for example, Dr. Greenstein-Weiss, like how do you approach the Israel government to implement your plan?
I think it starts with creating opportunities, using your network and coming. The first was like a few presentations and trying to write this idea in the media, and then opportunity to present in front of higher level government officials. And when I got the kind of attention of higher level government officials, I brought a delegation from the US to Israel. So it's really by networking and growing up the network and growing up the channel and getting to higher leaders, and then bringing other experts that showing that this idea is being implemented or think about, in the US was also helpful. So I think you needed all of that, but it's, at the end of the day, it's connection and network and reaching out.
Thank you. Any other panelists would like to answer the question?
Maybe I'll share a little bit. So I think, we started off and we continue to find those opportunities, keeping gender on the agenda. But now what we are also realizing is how important it is to institutionalize our seat on the table. And I think having our seat on the table means that we are part of the government policymaking. And that's really what we are pushing for a lot more these days. The other thing is, of course, like all the other panelists have said, about how are we reaching out to the media and the public? Because again, I think a lot of even legislations or policies, that tipping point where government actually addresses it or acts on it is when there is that groundswell, when we are able to bring evidence to the table. No, so that's the other thing. How we know that CSOs are the touch points of the grassroots. And so in terms of bringing the ground lived realities to the policymakers, I think that we have this great role to play to show how policy to practice and how it affects or impacts lived realities. This is something that we can contribute towards. And I think we need to, like SDG 17 says, we need to make ourselves relevant and see what are the areas and expertise that we bring to the policy table, but always remembering that we are walking together and not one ahead of the other. I think that's important to build trust.
Thank you. Any other panelists would like to comment? Okay. Oh, I'm getting the sign that we only have 4 minutes left. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you to all our wonderful panelists. And if you have more questions, please go on our Facebook and we'll try to contact our panelists for you and hopefully get your questions answered. And I have to say, I learned so much from all of you today, and thank you so much for being here. And I believe by working together, you know, we can really change the world. And so thank you very much, and hope everybody have a nice day or nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And let's be in touch.
Everyone.
Yes, let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, Mandy and team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.